My name's Farrell. For those of you who haven't met me, I've been in cybersecurity now since about 2009 permanently, but no, it's great to be back here at UTS. So for those of you unaware, this is where RuxCon was held back in the day. Did anyone ever get to RuxCon at all? Yeah, a couple of us did. So great to be back here, and thanks for B-Side Sydney for actually hosting it here. QR code for the slides, just to save you on constantly taking photos throughout my talk. I like to keep all my talks and things open and free and accessible for everyone. So look, today I'll just go through a bit of an overview of why. I'll then kick through some of the more theoretical pieces and considerations when you're doing exploration of wireless technologies. And then a couple of projects I've done here in Sydney and elsewhere, and that should take us through to 35 minutes. It's a very tight time frame to be talking about what is a very expansive topic. This is a setup I'm building out for a software-defined radio CTF as well, which I'm going back home to tonight to work on. Before anyone asks, yes, I am injured. This was courtesy of a combination of e-scooters and magpies in Canberra. Everything in this country is trying to kill us, yes. But I've also got a little demo on my shoulder as well, which I'll talk through a little bit later as we go through. So this is me. I've been pen testing now for about 12 years. I started my own business 7 and a bit years ago, which was an awesome idea, only because I don't know what I'm doing 6 weeks out, and I've been able to have a really good existence between when I started and now. But you know, it's been a bit of a tough time, but we're in a great space, and it's let me do cool little research projects like this. Outside of that, I like just doing other little random cybersecurity consulting jobs as well. I also lecture at the Australian Defence Force Academy as an industry fellow, specifically in wireless technologies. So why have I gone down this talk? The first one is I don't think this is an area we play enough in our day-to-day lives, or in a lot of our cybersecurity activities in this country. And I think one of the points that I always find is we keep seeing a lot of our approaches to cybersecurity turning into the big four consulting. Yeah, we'll drive a spreadsheet and talk about crown jewels assessments and charge you $50,000 to tell you what you already know, which is a really good lead into my first point. Wireless, some of the wireless topics I talk through has actually been really good exploration and understanding the technologies and the systems that we have out there. And so for me, you know, as a cybersecurity professional, I'm here because of my desire to learn and the approach I have to curiosity. So this is a domain that is awesome and rich for that sort of exploration, if this is something that you're really keen to look at. It's also relevant to us because we do live in what David Kilcullen refers to as urban littorals, which have really sophisticated intersections of the digital, physical, and social environment. And this, the fact that wireless is often at some close proximity does play into that, especially from a risk standpoint. And to that, there's also a lot of complexity in here as well. So, and hopefully that will become evident as I start talking through some of the projects and some of the things I work through. My intent here is that you leave here with, here's some cool things that I need to start looking at, or some ideas or some projects I can start playing with. If you leave here with that as your exit, I have achieved my job today. I've also just put on here 2 interesting images courtesy of some quick Googling from last night. The top one is the Lear-2 electronic warfare system that's currently employed by the Russian army in the Ukraine, although its employment has been quite limited. The bottom one was a screenshot that was associated with some jamming that that Ukrainian citizens were doing against the Russians as well. So I think it's interesting if you look at, say, Eric Hasseltine's book. He talks about how the electromagnetic spectrum is actually well understood in Central Europe. I don't think it's something, he highlighted that the Americans aren't pretty good at it. And I think for us as Australians, it's an area and a domain that we need to start breaking into a little bit more. So I will start off with the legal piece. Now, firstly, I'm not a lawyer, but here is some broad guidance to actually have. Yes, don't jam and don't be an absolute nuisance. And even if it isn't legal, sometimes jamming or overwhelming a network just is an absolute pain. Also, if you have a look at the variation between the Radio Communications Act and the Telecommunications Act, technically it's also illegal to do interception on telecommunications. So things, when I talk about, say, POXAG, that is technically kind of falling into a grey area. So I think my guidance really is come back to Wheaton's law and just common sense, and don't be a nuisance and don't do this to ingratiate yourself because you have come here to cosplay as a hacker. So that being said, if you do go through your standard formed penetration testing process, you have your permissions, you have a signed agreement from an asset owner that has given you permission to attack, go for it, but be conscious of what I call fratricide, which is to say you are operating in a space where you don't have as much control over where your signals are necessarily going unless you've got a Faraday cage. So be mindful that you could accidentally hit a neighbor whilst you're doing things. So there's a lot of planning and thinking to go through this. I would also suggest talking to lawyers before doing any sort of execution. So why is this relevant to us as cybersecurity practitioners? So let's come back to the OSI model for those of us that are studying undergraduate degrees or have gone through undergraduate degrees or at least got through the first year before they dropped out and decided to come into cybersecurity. The physical and data link layer is where wireless technologies operate for us. So at a physical layer, we're being able to transmit, and then at a data link layer, we're able to organize into some semblance what we're transmitting in a way that can be encoded or decoded from a transmitter or receiver. Beyond that, we have the rest of our models, such as routing, the application layer, and then beyond that, all of that fluffy stuff that involves spreadsheets and thought leadership. But the point for me is, what is cyber? I put cyber about here. We are an intersection between these environments. Our job is to actually understand what that intersection is. So this isn't just purely computer security or IT security or info security. We are looking at all these concepts merging together for us to think through what it is we're talking about. But it's also just an avenue for us to explore and understand, and learning off this space makes us better as professionals. So what is the spectrum when we start talking about the spectrum? This was a really cool diagram that came from Roden Schwartz, which I just ordered a couple of weeks ago, that actually highlights all of the communication standards that are relevant, some of the work that my team are working through. But the spectrum is a part of the broader electromagnetic spectrum, which starts at 0 hertz at 300 gigahertz. For us, I'm interested in about 70 megahertz to 3 gigahertz when I'm trying to do any sort of interception or understand what's happening out there. But what the spectrum is if you look at light as spectrum, you're able to see what's coming on screen here. When we talk about the electromagnetic spectrum, it's things that we can't necessarily see with the eye, but because we're able to manipulate with, say, an antenna or whatever, that just gets sent through there as well. But when we talk about these bands as well, we also have some bands that are relevant to us, such as the ISM ones, 433 to 435 megahertz in Australia, 916 to 928. Then you've got 802.11 Wi-Fi and also 802.11 AC at 5.8 gigahertz. In terms of some of the tools that you may want to be looking at when you're exploring in this space, I see a lot of people get very obsessed and hot and bothered about Wi-Fi pineapples. I push people away from them, not because they're bad or anything, but I come back to what I said before, where we're here to learn. And I think if you've got a clicky UI, you're not learning. It's like calling yourself a pen tester when all you're doing is running Nessus. Good, I'm in the right crowd. But my point here is, actually go down and break through what it is you're actually working through. So, I mean, if you have a look at the device I've rigged up here, it's simply a Raspberry Pi 3. On board, I've got one of these little RTL SDR cards that you can pick out of Dick Smith. I've got an even smaller one. I've got an even cheaper USB adapter for wireless. Sometimes you may need a Bluetooth adapter, but in this case, I'm just using the onboard Bluetooth. Also got some other kit on here as well. So I've got an 802.15.4 adapter, courtesy of Texas Instruments. But just to get started, a cheap RTL SDR dongle, if you're just doing sort of standard exploration of the electromagnetic spectrum, is usually enough. But even just some simple Wi-Fi cards as well also helps. If you are leveling up, you can spend that extra money on a hack RF or an Alpha card, especially if you're doing things like injection or you're looking to transmit. But to get started, you really don't need that much. In terms of just some cool tools and things to play around and do a bit of research on, there's tons of code that you can copy and execute as root from GitHub. Great idea. But no, seriously, a couple of cool little pieces of software that you can use to start on your journey. So Kismet and the Aircrack suite are pretty stock standard for 802.11. You've also got the RTL SDR blog as well, which takes you through a few little projects. GQRX and GNU Radio for your software-defined radio are another one. There's also a really cool 802.11 mind map that I came across, which really helps just visualize and understand what you're looking at. If you do need the QR code for the slide deck later to get some of these references, hit me up. MapRad is an awesome database of every ACMA registered device for someone that's actually gone out and purchased a license to transmit over radio. And then outside of that, yeah, there's heaps of other tools that you can go around and Google for. I'm not going to talk about power line of sight and antenna theory in much detail, only to say that if I have a simple antenna sticking up like that, what I can do is I can collect based on a circular propagation. Whereas if I've got a directional antenna, I can only look in one particular direction, which can also help us when I start talking through the 802.11 stuff of being able to discover and pinpoint, say, where a particular device is. Line of sight. So right now, I've been doing captures on and off all day with my shoulder. If I go into the bathroom, it's pretty much all concrete in there. So I won't be able to identify or collect things outside here when I'm in the facilities. And I think some of us have also had issues with getting mobile telephone reception in here as well. It's not China. It's just the fact that, radio waves need to actually push through the environment here, and that's not going to necessarily be achievable. If you need any more guides around Bluetooth or 802.15.4, I'll have my contact details at the end of this talk. I can flick you in the right direction. So what are some of the things that I've been going through and checking out in Sydney? So 802.11 stock standard Wi-Fi is I think what we always look at when we start talking about wireless security or wireless cybersecurity. More often than not, we'll go, yep, it's WPA2. That's all we need to know, right? The thing is, so there's also what I said before about this intersection between wireless technology and our physical and our social environment. So things that I like to look for in the 802.11 space is, can we start doing what we would call pattern of life analysis within an environment? Hypothetically, if you have an 802.11 system that is mission critical and has a high availability requirement, being able to do a walkthrough, talk through what a denial of service condition would do to it's always interesting. But I'm also a big fan of doing discovery. So this is me in a room with, in an office with a client of mine where we were using a directional antenna to pole out and hunt for 802.11 access points that weren't authorized. This was one that was beaconing out of an audio-visual system that was completely unauthorized that allowed us to break into the AV system. And there's other cool ones that we've found out as well. So we've identified on some of our wireless pen tests, for example, building management systems where engineers leave the BMS with an access point and a default password that we can just break into. Alternatively, you've also got just stuff that IT staff have spun up for their own use as well to bypass any internal restrictions on the wireless network. Client devices are also interesting, and I think this is something that especially when you talk to network engineers about pen testing wireless networks, there is an obsession with focusing on the access point when client security is still an important thing. So if a client is connecting to a rogue access point, in the case of WPA2 Enterprise with username and passwords, that does actually allow us to extract the username and a hash of that password. Anyone here use the Edgerome network at all? Yep. Yeah, a couple of years. So this was actually a really big problem with Edgerome back in a couple of years ago. I think they've fixed it. If not, okay. But big problem that you used to have, right, is if you just spun up a rogue access point called Edgerome and people were just you were just using an Android phone that hadn't been patched, it would automatically connect to that network without verifying the certificate of the access point, or you could at least fake that certificate. So people being desperate for Wi-Fi would click through and just give you their username and password. Clear text communications are also still a thing as well. So not only does that enable access, but it also allows you to do capture in that space as well. 802.11 has also got all these other weird standards coming up. So 802.11ax is something I haven't had a look at. About this time last year, I was having a look at 802.11ah, which is where they've gone from the stock standard 2.4 gigahertz and 5.8 gigahertz frequencies into 916 to 928 megahertz, which means that suddenly you can punch out by about 400, 500 meters. I did a wireless war drive of Sydney, and to my disappointment, I couldn't find any 802.11ah access points or clients. However, it was really cool because we were able to build out just a simple C2 exfil with our PIs using this, and would bypass all the other detection mechanisms. But yeah, I think for me, when we do a lot of our wireless pen tests, a lot of the faults aren't actually with the protocol itself. It's often with how it's actually configured and implemented. So, guest networks that allow you to route to server subnets, clients that are horribly insecure, all the way through to. So I think the WPA2 Enterprise stuff I'm seeing out there now is starting to level up. But even just things like war driving the city and working out what is around is also it's cool. Which is a good lead into my next project, which was 802.15.4. So I think Zigbee and half a dozen other protocols that use this. So the intent with 802.15.4 is it's a low power protocol that's focused on more OT related activities. So this was a project I did back in 2018. I presented at DEF CON on this one, where I had a USB hub with 16 of these Texas Instruments dongles monitoring each of the 2.4 gigahertz channels, trying to work out, trying to just capture every single packet we could. The problem with 802.15.4 is it's transmitting about once every 5 seconds or so, which if you're using, say, a standard Wi-Fi, so one of the concepts that's always existed with, say, standard Wi-Fi dongles is you'll channel hop, once every couple of seconds, which means that there's a very good chance that you're actually going to miss what's happening. Which, that's kind of why I come back and talk about, don't rely purely on tools that you're buying off the internet. Going through that discovery process was really insightful for us in terms of understanding how the protocol worked, because there's every chance that, had we skipped over that, we probably would have, there's nothing here, and it's, therefore it's secure, which, no pen tester with their CEH has ever done that before. So, 802.15.4, a couple of cool things that we started seeing. So if you have a look at the map that we've got here from our 2018 research, if you focus in on some of these areas, these are actually new buildings that have been built in 2018. So Barangaroo, over on Pitt Street, there was a new hotel that just got constructed. So a lot of the deduction that we had around this was, okay, these are new buildings with new fancy OT. In the case of some of the hotels, it looked like they had hotel locks as well. And so this kind of comes back to, I think, a curious thing that I'm sure is all relevant for us in cybersecurity. It's often what we don't know that's going to cause this risk. So, what is the system that we're not tracking? What is the technology that the marketing team decided to spin up because they had a wonderful idea and then decided not to secure it properly? And so being able to do this sort of discovery is great because it's now, okay, well, here's a whole heap of technology that we weren't thinking about that we now need to start tracking a little bit better. Other thing as well in this space is if you also have a patch management policy that says these devices need to be patched within 48 hours, more often than not, you will also find that the technology associated with this can't be patched hard and fast. So that's another curiosity you have as well, especially as you're introducing some of this technology into your organization. So what about Bluetooth? I've always found Bluetooth a little bit harder, and it's also usually quite specific to a project or an item of research. So for example, the scooter that I decided to go falling off on a couple of weeks ago that resulted in said injury, there is an interface from your phone to that scooter to have a couple of unlock mechanisms. There's also, say, for example, the watch that I'm wearing has another Bluetooth interface on it that talks to my phone. So each of these devices are in fact beaconing out at various stages, and we're able to identify those beacons, but being able to capture actually requires us to capture the pairing mechanism. It's a little bit harder, and if you don't do that initial capture, then because the frequency hopping, it's a little bit hard to also discover. Relative to, say, 802 to 11, direction finding these devices, there's really not as much kit out there yet. It's something that I'd be really keen to work on if I've got some time. It's a little bit hard, but certainly not impossible. Then you have also, if you are interacting with these devices, what can you do? Things like Bluetooth locks, for example, can you unlock or unlock? We've also done a site survey with one of our customers recently where they didn't realize that the Carver locks that they were using also had a Bluetooth interface that no one actually told them about. ESP32s are also cool for this. You'll see here for the COVID Safe app, one of the ways I did my research on the Bluetooth interfaces for this was just took a rooted Nexus phone and just stuffed around with it to actually turn it into a war driver to see if we could actually do unique mapping and identification of people using the COVID Safe app, amongst a few other really cool little discoveries I did. I've got a couple of write-ups on that as well if you're interested. I think the big one for me with that app was that it worked about 60% of the time, just because Bluetooth is hard. That being said, another cool piece of research in this space, Rich O'Healy and Bluetooth skateboards and being able to fling hipsters off said skateboards. Trunk radio networks. So I will sort of urge caution on this one, just because we've done some active research, well, not active research, we've been actually researching this space in Sydney, and I won't go into any detail on it. This is a pie that we used to have in our office that we set up to do capture and dump of a bunch of trunk radio networks in the city. These are critical infrastructure networks that were, all right, these are online. Has anyone actually thought through the security risks associated with these? So a trunk radio network, think you've got your radio, you're now able to communicate data and voice over it. Problems you have there, though, is you've still got your layer one jamming attacks. So, for example, this is critical infrastructure associated with a bunch of mining sites up in Queensland and the rail networks to transport raw materials to the ports. What happens if we jam that network? Is that a safety system? Does management suddenly panic thinking, oh my God, China? How does that play out? That being said, heaps of these are also in Sydney. I won't go into the Sydney details just because, as I said, we've looked at them and I'm really reluctant to break out of what I've just sort of highlighted there as they exist. There might be a point of curiosity to go into. Cellular networks as well is another space. So this was using a Blade RF, where we decided to go and use a tool that got published by the Electronic Frontiers Foundation for discovery of cell towers within Sydney, using a process called trilateration, where it would say, okay, we know that cell towers are beaking out on these specific frequencies. So I had to rebuild a bunch of the configurations based on data from MapRad to actually establish what were the known frequencies that the major telecommunications providers were using, and then work out what's actually out there. Reality is at 4G, 5G, we're not going to be in a place where we're going to be doing person in the middle attacks, but we can at least discover cell towers, work out what's happening in the environment. What was really cool with this project was we then decided to correlate what we had known was true and accurate in MapRad and what were the registered cell towers and frequencies, correlate it with the data set that we'd collected. And it was curious to note that there were probably 2 or 3 cell towers that hadn't actually had their frequency registered. So I'm immediately thinking, is this someone setting up for an unauthorized capture with a rogue cell tower? What's going on here? Other curious one was over at Wentworth Park. Someone had a default config on a known package built, and it was just broadcasting in the same frequency space as all the other telco providers, and doing so from an unauthorized standpoint. So yeah, people were just creating their own cell towers for fun and profit. Probably not profit. No. So what are some other cool projects you've got? There are a heap of gadgets that you have around your house. So think of temperature sensors, the blinds to your, if you've got those electric blinds that you can get from IKEA, they also run on an on-off keying. They use on-off keying at 433 to 435 megahertz. Your garage remotes as well. Home alarm systems also operate in this space. If you ever come do my postgrad course at the Australian Defence Force Academy, I take you through a risk with a static key getting transmitted by a home alarm system, as well as the sensors associated with that home alarm system, which would be great for a nuisance factor or being able to arm or disarm said home alarm system. You can also capture aircraft flying overhead and transponder messages coming off those aircraft. The maritime environment around Sydney, ships have what's called AIS, which is automatic ship identification. So being able to pick out what's going on those vessels and where they're navigating to is kind of cool. POXTAG's another one. I do put an asterisk on POXTAG. So this was a research project I did do in 2014, where we were able to identify change control numbers into data centers, which back then was usually the only way you got authenticated as, yes, you're allowed to enter this data center. And there are also things like URLs and credentials getting communicated in clear text. I did that, with this mindset of, cool, let's actually discover and actually help people. I'm not sure if anyone was tracking, but I think about 2020, some kid over in Perth decided to publish it out to the internet because, as I said, he was cosplaying cybersecurity and, 15-year-old elite person downloading code on the internet. That's nice to hear. So yeah, that was kind of it was a bit of a frustrating thing because, hey, here's a place where we can actually do some good. Instead, someone's just decided to make life difficult for all of us. LoRa is another place I'm now starting to play with as well, both in terms of things like just being able to create secure messaging via little ESP32s. Space and satellite is another place I'm going to start exploring once my arms are functioning again. And restaurant pages, they're there. It's nice, but yeah, they're another place where you can be a nuisance. So you can also see on the bottom right here, that's a Starlink satellite terminal, just as an example. DECT, so these are the old cordless phones transmitting at about 1.9 gigahertz. yeah, being able to intercept off those or even the old baby monitors is another place. Drones is another area that you might be able to play with as well, both in terms of drones having control functions getting transmitted over radio, but also the inputs and the sensors for drones. So things such as GPS. Can you throw a GPS? Can you throw a drone? Of course, there's some really cool research done out of the University of Texas around that. But even look around our city, right? This was a photo I took in probably a few days ago. Can anyone see the antenna here? All right, that is probably a really terrible image, but there is an antenna on this traffic light system. What does that look like? And has someone actually thought through, the attack vectors around, all right, if I sent through a go green signal to all of the lights, could I create havoc because, hey, I'm just here for kicks? There's also, I talked about it at the start of the cities we are living in are these really complex urban littorals. What happens if we start throwing things off like airports or railway lines or traffic control systems? How does that play out? Cranes and other maritime vessels as well could also play into this. So yeah, a couple of cool little areas for us to be thinking about. So folks, that's it. We've got about 5 minutes to spare. I'm happy to open up to questions, but thanks for attending and yeah, enjoy the rest of B-Sides. Questions, or does everyone want to go to lunch? Yeah. Say again. Interesting. You've still got to establish line of sight. And if you also remember, if you've got your two antennas, right, can they at least isolate that point-to-point link? I mean, Tetra as well is also meant to have point-to-point links, but the one that we did research here on in Sydney, it was just emanating everywhere. So we're still able to capture it. So, still come back to encrypting your links. But yeah, it's thing. Yeah. Thank you. Any more for any more? Yeah, up the back there. Say again. What does what do? The Pi. So the Pi is running Kismet. I have an RTL SDR that's looking for devices communicating 433 to 435 megahertz. I also have the Texas Instruments CC2531. That's trying to see if there's any 802.15.4 networks in range. I've also got just a simple USB dongle collecting on 2.4 gigahertz. So plenty of MAC addresses popping up there. Plus there's also Bluetooth as well on board the Pi itself. So cool, thank you. All right, everyone's going. Thanks guys and girls.